For 56 days in the spring of 1944, an unspeakable tragedy unfolded with mechanical precision. Over 437,000 Hungarian Jews were crammed into 147 trains and deported directly to Auschwitz. "80% were murdered upon arrival in the gas chambers, their lives extinguished before they had even seen their destination. This was not the chaos of war, it was its coldest, most calculated face. The operation was executed with terrifying speed and efficiency, thanks to the chilling cooperation between Nazi occupiers and Hungarian Arrow Cross authorities. In less than 8 weeks, every Jewish community in Hungary's countryside was erased from the map. This mass deportation would become the single largest killing operation of Jews during the Holocaust, and it occurred not in the darkness of early war, but at its twilight, at a moment when the world knew. Allied leaders had confirmed the existence of gas chambers. The truth had surfaced, and still the trains rolled on. This is the story of how a nation's Jews were betrayed and abandoned to the machinery of genocide by their own government, who chose alliance and nationalism over humanity, and why the world cannot afford to forget. In 1938, Hungary's population stood at nearly 14.7 million. Among them, more than 725,000 identified as Jewish, with another 100,000 of Jewish descent who professed Christianity. For generations, Jewish Hungarians had contributed to the nation's intellectual, cultural, and economic life. But by 1938, their future was set on a path toward darkness. The Kingdom of Hungary was ruled by Regent Miklós Horthy, who, under his authority, began to mirror Nazi Germany's racial doctrine, and a series of anti-Jewish measures were installed. Jewish employment in government at any level was forbidden. They could not be editors at newspapers. Their numbers were restricted to 6% among theatre and movie actors, physicians, lawyers, and engineers. Private companies were forbidden to employ more than 12% Jews. 250,000 Hungarian Jews lost their income. However, cruel as those measures were, Horthy had resisted large-scale deportations of Jews for years. By the time 1944 had rolled around, and the 4 Jewish laws had been enforced, Hungary was the last large, untouched Jewish population in Europe. But time was running out for Hitler. He was clearly losing the war, and military defeat was near. The Soviets were advancing from the east. The Allies had landed in Italy and were preparing for D-Day in France. The Nazis knew the window to complete the final solution was closing. On 18 March 1944, Hitler summoned Horthy to a conference in Austria, where he demanded greater acquiescence from Hungary. Horthy resisted, but his efforts were fruitless. While he was at the conference, Nazi tanks rolled into Budapest and quickly occupied Hungary. Hitler forced Horthy to remove Prime Minister Miklós Horthy from office. Horthy, like Horthy, knew the Nazis were losing the war and had put out numerous feelers to the west. He signed a secret agreement to surrender unconditionally to the Western Allies. Horthy faced an ultimatum: remove Calais and install a pro-Nazi government, or be replaced himself by a Nazi Gauleiter, a regional leader of the Nazi Party. Horthy yielded. On March 23rd, Prime Minister Dömer-Sztójay, Berlin's obedient puppet, took power. One of his earliest acts was to legalize the Arrow Cross Party, Hungary's homegrown fascist force, previously banned by Horthy. With frightening swiftness, the Arrow Cross took hold. The Ministry of the Interior fell to Laszlo Endre, Laszlo Baki, and their superior, Andor Jaros, names that would become synonymous with organized cruelty. The machinery of annihilation was now in motion. In a mere 8 weeks, Hungary descended into darkness. Jews were marked, herded, and caged in ghettos. The plan: 4 trains a day, each with 45 cattle cars, deporting 12,000 Jews daily from Hungary's countryside. March 19, 1944. As German forces crossed into Hungary, one man arrived with a singular mission: Adolf Eichmann. At the head of a Sonderkommando unit, Eichmann came not to conquer, but to organize genocide. His task: to oversee the swift deportation of Hungary's Jews to Auschwitz. Far to the north, in occupied Poland, the machinery of death had long been in motion. Auschwitz, its name now infamous, had been transformed into the epicenter of mass murder by SS officer Rudolf Höss. Since June 1941, under orders from Heinrich Himmler, Höss had overseen the systematic extermination of Europe's Jews. Particularly demonic, he wasn't just the commandant. He personally experimented with different gases to execute his crimes. His signature became hydrogen cyanide, produced from the pesticide Zyklon B. With Zyklon B, he said at his Nuremberg trial in April 1946, "This gassing set my mind at rest." He added that it took 3 to 15 minutes for the victims to die. "We knew when the people were dead because they stopped screaming." Auschwitz was chosen, Höss later recalled, for its isolation and its rail connections. Its location made it ideal for secrecy, its scale ideal for slaughter. The operation was classified as a secret Reich matter. Not even high-ranking SS officers were to speak of it. Everyone promised upon his life to keep the utmost secrecy, Höss would later testify. The first mass gassing experiments began on September 3, 1941. These early trials, horrific in both design and effect, were the blueprints for industrialized death. In time, Auschwitz became not just a camp, but a killing factory. Höss stated, "I commanded Auschwitz until 1 December 1943, and estimate that at least 2,500,000 victims were executed and exterminated there by gassing and burning, and at least another 500,000 succumbed to starvation and disease, making a total of about 3 million dead." In December 1943, Rudolf Höss was removed from his position as commandant of Auschwitz under a cloud of scandal, accusations of embezzlement, and the rape and impregnation of an Austrian prisoner. He was temporarily sent back to Berlin, but as the wider Nazi campaign crumbled, the frantic hurry to murder Hungarian Jews accelerated. Himmler knew his window to complete the final solution was closing, so he ordered Höss return. Given his experience and the scale of what was planned, Höss was given a singular directive: to oversee and coordinate the extermination of the Hungarian Jews. With Eichmann's arrival in Budapest and Höss preparing Auschwitz, the Nazi horror entered its deadliest phase. The machinery was ready, the human tide was on its way. On May 14th, the full machinery of genocide shifted into high gear. The Reichssicherheitshauptamt began organizing mass transports from across Hungary. The Hungarian government handled the logistics up to the northern border. From there, the trains were absorbed into the Nazi death network. The first 3 transports reached Auschwitz on May 16th, each consisting of 40 to 50 freight cars. That night, the first black plumes of smoke rose from the crematoria chimneys. The commander at Kassa rail station kept meticulous records. Each day, 3 or 4 freight trains, sometimes 6, sometimes more, passed through, each packed with 3,000 to 4,000 human beings. There were 109 trains in the first 33 days, until the 13th of June. From 25th to 29th June, there were 10 trains, then 18 between 5th to 9th July. Another 10 trains arrived via routes other than Budapest. On arrival, prisoners were ordered to leave their belongings on the platform, belongings they would never see again. Organized into rows of 5, the bewildered deportees were marched directly to the crematoria. Their report read, "Auschwitz, Operation Höss. Since the middle of May, numerous transports of Hungarian Jews. Each night, 8 trains arrive, every day 5. The trains consist of 48 to 50 cars each, and in each car are 100 people. Settlers arrive with these transports. Each train of settlers also has 2 freight cars of lumber, which the settlers unload on the death ramp, bring to another site, and stack in piles that are intended for them. In order to simplify the work, the people arrive already separated, for example, children in separate cars. The closed trains wait for several hours on the special track to be unloaded. They stand in the nearby small forest. From the 3rd of June, the electric fence was kept switched on during the day, instead of only at night, because of attempts by the prisoners to escape. By June 13th, over 300,000 Jews had arrived. According to Höss, Himmler wanted the deportations to speed up. The system began to strain with the demand. Höss later testified that Auschwitz could not keep pace with the sheer volume of corpses. Bodies piled up. Crematoria were overwhelmed. Höss was forced to travel to Budapest to reorganize the schedule. Transports were reduced to 2 or 3 trains on alternating days. Still, Himmler demanded more, faster. Flames poured from the chimneys day and night, but the crematoria could no longer cope with the number of corpses. Eventually, pits were dug, bodies were burned in the open. It was the most chillingly aggressive phase of the Holocaust, and one of the most devastating in human history. Of the hundreds of thousands herded onto trains, only 20% were not sent directly to their deaths. These were the selected, the ones deemed useful to the Nazi machine. They were spared the gas chambers, but not mercy. They became slave laborers in factories, mines, or quarries. Others were chosen for something worse, to serve as human subjects in grotesque medical experiments. On May 22nd, and again on May 29th, groups of 2,000 Hungarian Jews were selected for admission into the camp system. A few days later, on May 28th, 963 were transferred from Auschwitz I to Mauthausen in Austria. On June 5th, another 2,000 were dispatched to Buchenwald in Germany, and still the machinery churned. The transports were unrelenting, but amid the brutal logic of labor and death, something even darker stirred. On May 29th, a Jewish Hungarian doctor named Miklós Horthy arrived with his wife and daughter. He would soon be conscripted into the service of Joseph Mengele, the SS doctor whose name would become synonymous with sadistic experimentation. Mengele's obsession was twins, living, breathing subjects for pseudo-scientific curiosity masquerading as medicine. From the moment the Hungarian trains began arriving, twins were pulled from the lines. On May 17th, a group of twin boys, each born with a sibling, were registered as so-called depot prisoners. The following day, 20 twin sisters were selected. They were housed together, observed like specimens. Some were kept alive for weeks. Others were dissected alive. They were injected with chemicals, subjected to surgeries without anesthesia, their lives destroyed in the name of Nazi racial ideology. The cruelty had no flaw. In the shadow of the crematoria, even survival was a form of torment, and for the chosen few who escaped immediate execution, what lay ahead was a long, slow death of another kind. It's estimated that about 1,500 pairs of twins were experimented on by Mengele. Fewer than 200 pairs survived. Just before the deportations of Jews from Budapest began, the Vrba Wetzler report reached the Allies. The report provided a detailed description of the gas chambers and what was happening inside the camp. It had been dictated in April 1944 to the Slovakian Jewish Council by 2 Auschwitz escapees, Rudolf Vrba and Alfred Wetzler. Horthy's son and daughter-in-law both received copies of the report in early May, before mass deportations began. Information from the report about the murder of Czech Jews in Auschwitz was broadcast in Germany by the BBC World Service on its women's program at noon on 16th June 1944, with a warning that the Germans would be held responsible after the war. The Western Allies landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944. On June 15th, the mayor of Budapest designated 2,000 starred houses, to which every Jew had to move. The idea was that the Allies would not bomb Budapest with starred houses scattered around the town. On the basis of the Vrba Wetzler report, world leaders, including Pope Pius XII on 25th June, President Franklin D. Roosevelt on 26th June, and King Gustav V of Sweden on 30th June, appealed to Horthy to stop the deportations to Auschwitz. Roosevelt threatened military retaliation, and on 7th July, Horthy ordered an end to them. The killing ended on July 9th, after 56 days. By then, the numbers were staggering, 437,402. Roughly 80% were gassed upon arrival. By late summer 1944, even Miklós Horthy could no longer ignore the direction his country was headed. On August 29th, he dismissed Prime Minister Domice Stolyzai, the Nazi puppet who had overseen Hungary's mass deportations. But the tides of war were shifting, and so too were the plans of the Third Reich. On 15th October, after Horthy announced an armistice in a nationwide radio address, Hitler initiated Operation Panzerfaust, sending Commander Otto Skorzeny to Budapest with instructions to remove Horthy from power. He was arrested that day and remained in Bavaria until the war in Europe ended. power immediately fell into the hands of Ferenc Szalasi, leader of the fascist Arrow Cross Party. With Szalasi came a renewed and unrelenting brutality. Tens of thousands of Jews still in Budapest were forced into death marches, on foot, toward the Austrian border. Many perished from exhaustion, starvation, or were simply shot along the roadside. Meanwhile, Jewish slaves were deported to Germany, with many ending up in the Bergen-Belsen industrial concentration camp. Inside Budapest, 2 ghettos were erected. The smaller, the so-called International Ghetto, was a patchwork of designated starred houses in the Újlipott-Város district, homes placed under the supposed protection of neutral nations. 40,000 people were crammed into the small district, with up to 60 people sharing one room in a single apartment. The larger Budapest ghetto was walled in around Erzsébet-Város, a dense neighborhood in the heart of the city. It became a prison for 70,000 people. Starvation and fear ruled its streets. The Arrow Cross, Nyilas guards, conducted constant raids. Men, women, and children were dragged from their homes and executed in cold blood. From November 1944 through February 1945, as the Red Army advanced on Budapest, the Arrow Cross unleashed a final wave of terror. Between 10,000 and 15,000 Jews were shot on the banks of the Danube River, their bodies tumbling into the icy water, lost to time. On January 18, 1945, Soviet troops liberated the main Budapest ghetto. But the killing didn't end there. On the Buda side of the city, Arrow Cross death squads continued to operate, murdering Jews up until the moment Soviet forces seized control on February 13th. For 163 brutal days, the city was shattered, the Jewish community decimated, but those who survived would carry the memory of the ghettos, the marches, forever. Dr. Gabor Mate was born in January 1944, just a few months before Operation Höss began. His mother gave him away temporarily to a stranger to save his life, fearing she couldn't keep him safe. He survived the Arrow Cross, the Nazis, and Operation Höss. His father was sent to forced labor and survived. His grandparents were murdered in Auschwitz. His survival is part of the broader story of how Budapest's Jews were among the last to be targeted, and how some managed to endure amid unspeakable horror. Dr. Mate often speaks about the deep psychological impact of this early trauma, even though he was too young to remember it consciously. He connects it to his later work on trauma, addiction, and emotional health. Further prominent Hungarian Jews who survived the Holocaust include Elie Wiesel, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, human rights activist, and prolific writer. Tommy Lapid. He moved to Israel, became a prominent journalist, justice minister, a Knesset member, and father of Yair Lapid, an eventual Israeli prime minister. Imre Kertész won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2002. Yehuda Bacon. He became a renowned artist and Holocaust witness who testified at the Eichmann trial. George Klein. He became a leading cancer researcher and molecular biologist in Sweden. Around 45,000 to 50,000 Hungarian Jewish survivors of the Holocaust relocated to Israel following its establishment in 1948. Joseph Mengele evaded capture after the war, fleeing to South America, where he died in 1979 without ever being brought to justice. Rudolf Höss was sentenced to death on April 16, 1947, beside the crematorium of the former Auschwitz concentration camp. He was hanged. Heinrich Himmler was captured by British forces on May 21, 1945. 2 days later, he committed suicide. Adolf Eichmann was executed by the State of Israel in 1962. Dostoevsky was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against the Hungarian people, sentenced to death and executed by a firing squad in Budapest in 1946. Ferenc Szalasi was captured by American troops in Austria in May 1945. He was executed by hanging on 12 March 1946. Miklós Horthy was first liberated on May 1, 1945, then arrested by US troops and moved to the prison facility at Nuremberg. Although he was interviewed repeatedly about his contacts with some of the defendants, he did not testify in person. On 17 December 1945, Horthy was released and allowed to rejoin his family in Bavaria. He was financially supported by Pope Pius XII, whom he knew personally. He died in 1957. If you like this video, share your thoughts on the situation in the comments section. Remember to subscribe and shoot that like button too. Ciao.